Hello everyone. I welcome to all of you on this webinar on the subject export of services under GST regime. Today we would be discussing about this topic with few of the recent clarification issued by the CBIC in this context. First is the intermediary and second is the meaning of the expression establishment of distinct persons, merely establishment of distinct person, which is given under the definition of export of services. So if we see the history of this intermediary issue, in 2018, the Maharashtra Advanced Ruling Authority first, held that back-end support services would qualify as intermediary services. And after that, there were so many advanced rulings, few were in favor of the taxpayers and many were against. And thus it created chaos in the industry. The council somewhere in 2019 had decided that it will issue a clarification to clarify this definition. So in July 2019, the CBIC issued a clarification, but there were few apprehensions relating to that particular clarification, which later was withdrawn by the government with a commitment that it will again issue a clarification. And after 45th GST Council meeting, the government has again issued this particular clarification relating to intermediary. The another point which I would like to highlight that this concept of intermediary per se is under the judicial scrutiny. The matter is pending before the third member bench of Honorable Bombay High Court, whether it is constitutionally valid or not. Another clarification which the government has issued is relating to the definition of the meaning of the expression, the establishment of distinct person, right? Will two companies holding and subsidiary would cover within this expression or not? Because authorities recently has started denying the refund to this particular on account of this particular relation. So these two clarification issued by the governments are welcome clarification, and this would be discussed in today's webinar. So we have Deloitte team with us, Mr. Mahesh, who is a partner in Deloitte, and Saloni, she's a subject matter expert in GST. And we also have Mr. Parande, he is the ex-member of CBIC, and the team would now be taking this session. Over to you, Saloni, please.
Thanks, Anil. I'm glad you gave an overview of the situation and the matter. Thank you for that. I'll now move into a more, slightly more detailed explanation of the background, and I'll just change the slides. So this is the agenda that we have for today. We start with an overview of the export provisions under GST. We talk about the implications on export of services. Subsequently, we'll move on to the clarifications that were recently announced in the GST Council meeting, the 45th GST Council meeting. And so this is broadly what we have. Moving on to export of services. So the concept that is there under GST is something that has been inherited from the service tax regime. And originally in service tax, there wasn't a concept of export. It was a blanket exemption which was available for foreign currency, for receipts in foreign convertible currency. That exemption was withdrawn, and there was a furor, and subsequent to that, there was a clarification issued by the CBC saying that services that are exported shall not be subject to service tax, and service tax is a destination-based consumption tax. So that's where the genesis lies of the export concept, which we have and are discussing today from the service tax regime. So in 2017, when GST was introduced, the provisions which were contained in the service tax law were broadly used almost identically and incorporated in the GST law. So that's what we have under GST. Export of services as a concept is very important and keen because India, as you know, has many businesses that are engaged in export of services. And this area has largely boomed due to the fact that India is a country where services, high quality services are available and maybe in a more cost efficient manner. So we have a broad variety of services that have been provided over the years, and this has only grown in significant proportion. So if we see this concept of export of services, it is keen because India has a large service exporter community. And this service exporter community is interested in the treatment of their services, and added tax on their services sometimes could make us uncompetitive vis-a-vis other jurisdictions. So India today is competing with the world, with other jurisdictions. And India is seen as one of the competitors. Of course, we are a front runner there, but nonetheless, this concept is important because if services qualify as exports, they're zero rated and there's no tax applicable, no GST applicable. However, if they're not treated as exports, there's a tax of 18%. And that does add to the cost of the recipient because no credits are available in the other jurisdiction mostly. So coming on to what the conditions are to qualify as export, this slide essentially captures the key conditions to qualify as export. These are enumerated in the law itself, and the simple one being the supplier of services is located in India. The recipient of services is located outside of India. The place of supply of service is outside India. And this is a concept which I'll talk a little bit more on. Payment for such services has been received in convertible foreign exchange. And this is the same condition which existed under service tax. Supplier and recipient of service are not merely establishments of a distinct person. This last concept under GST has faced a significant amount of debate. While we did face debate, I'm not aware of much debate on this concept under service tax, but definitely under GST, we've had a significant amount of issues rising on account of this. Now, coming to place of supply of service is outside of India. There are provisions which deal with when a service is considered to be performed outside of India or within India. So to take a few examples, if there are advisory services, consultancy services, those are typically considered to be outside of India, even though the actual work may be being done in India, but it is considered, the place of supply is considered to be outside of India. However, if there are services which are performed, for example, intermediary services, the concept of intermediary, the place of supply has been defined to be in India. Again, services in relation to goods. So those could be maintenance services, warranty services, which an Indian party could be undertaking on behalf of another, of the principal. These are all considered to happen in India. So that concept of place of supply outside of India is not met in connection with services in relation to goods. Even hotel services, that's also hotel accommodation is also considered to be a service which takes place in India. So this concept is also important while determining what qualifies as an export of services. But for today's discussion, what is key are the concept of intermediary and the concept of supplier and recipient of service, them not being mere establishments of a distinct person. Now, the implications of qualifying as export of services, there are definitely benefits, and which is why exporters are keen that their services qualify as export. So the options that are available to an exporter of services is that there's a small typo here. So it's export of services at a zero rate of GST. Then the other aspect is they could export services with GST at the applicable rate on the said services. So these are the two aspects which a taxpayer, these are the two concessions that taxpayers could get. Thereafter, the benefits are for an exporter. So apart from zero rating or paying after using their credits, that they can take a refund of the unutilized input tax credit when you export services at a zero rate. Or the other option is to take a refund of the GST paid on export of services. So these are the two broad benefits that are available to exporters of services. However, we've seen that over the course of time, we found that there has been litigation and difference in positions over time, different authorities. So once there were established positions, in fact, even in service tax, there was a time when refunds were not coming through, and then gradually they did start. And then we found that under GST, we had to again go through a teething phase where refunds were again getting denied, and maybe for different reasons. So we have all these issues for exporters of services. Considering that there is refund which is available to exporters of services, therefore the department definitely looks at these more keenly to see if the benefit is being granted given to cases where this is definitely entitled. So there is always greater scrutiny on refund applications, specifically since the department would like to be careful over such disbursements. So the key issues that we have found for GST and under export, the key issues are essentially that activities are being alleged as intermediary services. So the key issues are essentially that service providers who may be engaged in marketing activities, sales promotion activities, back office activities, after sales support, market surveys, so a variety of a gamut of services that may be provided. These are being alleged to qualify as intermediary services. So the concept of intermediary is very important and key, and we will be discussing that in the slides to come. But this concept itself is being used frequently by the tax authorities to deny export benefit, and that as a consequence also the refunds. So this is one major issue. The other issue is regarding establishments of distinct persons. Now, more recently, we found that certain state GST authorities have been raising this as an issue, mostly in Haryana, in Karnataka, in Maharashtra. This is where broadly we have seen this issue come up. Principally, what this meant was that where there was a subsidiary or a related company offering services, providing services to a related overseas entity, the authorities were treating them as establishments of a distinct person. So they were considering them as branch offices of each other, rather than treating them as separate entities. So they were, in a sense, lifting the corporate veil and trying to allege that the export of services benefit is not available, essentially, since they are establishments of distinct persons. So this was happening despite a clarification which had been issued by the CBIC FAQ in December 2018, which clarified this aspect. We also had a judicial pronouncement by the Gujarat High Court in Linde Engineering, which also held that such entities would not qualify as establishments of a distinct person. But despite the FAQ by the CBIC plus the Gujarat High Court ruling, the authorities at the ground level were ignoring these precedents, not precedents, but essentially the clarification as well as the ruling, and were rejecting refund claims. And these were also in cases where in the past there has been a consistency in obtaining refunds. The refunds were available, but with this position being adopted, refunds were not being allowed. So we did take it up also with the GST Council. We highlighted this to the Commissioner, had conversations there. So there was appreciation of the matter, but there was no clear yes or no until we had this circular which came out. So the implications broadly have been, on these activities being alleged as intermediary. Typically, we found this happening by the central authorities and the allegement of establishments of distinct persons by the state authorities. And this essentially led to refunds being denied and rejected and matters being appealed. And we found that with change in tax authorities, the tax positions were also changing. So consistency was found to be lacking. So there has been considerable representation on the matter because of the pain that industry was facing. And as a result of it, we have 2 new circulars which were issued, clarifying on the scope of intermediary services, as well as on the issue of establishments of a distinct person and how that is to be interpreted. So with that, I will now hand over to Mahesh to take forward a discussion on the circular which was issued on intermediary services. Mahesh, over to you. Mahesh, we can't hear you.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Am I audible?
Yes.
This is a new technology for me. So thank you. No, I was saying that thank you, Sunil, and thank you, Saloni. I think this topic is clearly as hot as it can get, just not by the nature of the points that any of us will make, but by the nature of questions that I see and the level of interest and excitement. Clearly, it's been a long wait, but a wait that is worth it. Saloni, you did mention a build-up to what happened, and Sunil, you talked about how this got approved in the 37th GST Council meeting in September 2021, and there was the earlier September 2019, and the July 2019 circular got withdrawn. But clearly, it took a couple of years for the updated circular to see the light of the day. But for me, professionally and personally, I'm very satisfied by the way this circular has come out. It's close to a $200 billion IT/ITES export industry that has been impacted the most. I must hasten to add that intermediary has not only confined itself to the IT/ITES industry, but to the advertising, to the media, brand expenses, and whatnot. So when I did look at the circular and noticed that this circular did not have a cross-reference to the IT or ITES, that was a very welcoming factor to note. So in that backdrop, what are the few takeaways from the circular? And we were discussing this amongst ourselves, Mr. Parande, Saloni, and I think one of the key message for each one of us in the meeting, at least from our perspective, is that this is certainly an achievement from a policy advocacy and the way it's come, but this is a means to an end. So this is something that will certainly help you, but do pay attention to what this can do to help you rather than saying this on a standalone basis helps you. Moving on, I think one of the essential aspect of this circular is that it clearly states that 5 principles have been explained as to what is the ingredients for a service to qualify to be an intermediary. Saloni did talk about intermediary not necessarily being a GST concept. It came way back in July 2012 when we had the negative list of service tax and the pretty comprehensive education guide that was issued by the Central Board of Excise and Customs at that point of time. And to that extent, that document was a starting point. This explains a few things further. So what are the 5 principles? 3-party requirement. So clearly, for there to be an arranging or facilitating, there needs to be 3 parties, A, B, and C, as I would call it. And clearly, as we proceed into the next principle, which dovetails very well to the first principle, it says that the intermediation service should actually be ancillary to the principal supply. So just because there are 3 parties, it's not good enough. There is an activity done by A to B, which should be ancillary to what is being done between B and C. I wouldn't wordsmith these aspects too much in detail, but critical to understand that it's not, it has been effectively been reiterated and brought out abundantly clear that merely because there are 3 parties, it's not enough. There will be 2 distinct supplies, but the supply should be ancillary. One of the important and the third criteria is the aspect or the ingredient that has been explained that says that the person should be acting in capacity of an agent or broker or any other person. So as all of you may know, the definition of intermediary says an intermediary means an agent, broker, or any other person. And therefore, I think without saying the words ejusdem generis principle, the clarification, as rightly so said, you need to see the character of the service provider, and it should have, in some sense, a flavor of being an agent or a broker. I think that in this backdrop, I would like to hasten to add that merely because the agreement doesn't say that you're an agent or broker, it doesn't mean you're out. Please look at the spirit of what the service provider is when you want to take shelter of this very important part of the clarification. The clarification further states that it does not include where the person is supplying the main supply or the supply of the goods or the service is provided on their own account. So this is something that one would need to see. And last but not the least, I think that to me, this was the most critical part of the clarification, where it has been abundantly clarified with an illustration that merely because there is a supply between 2 parties and there is a subcontract given to an Indian entity, that subcontract, just because there are 3 parties and just because one could perhaps, you say, is it arranging or facilitating? I think this clarification has clearly stated that subcontract is not to be taxable as an intermediary. So let's not forget that subcontract could be a very wide phrase. It's had a history under the sales tax and VAT laws. I won't go that far. To me, the fundamental principle is even if it's a subcontract in entirety or in part, this part of the circular should be able to come to some level of rescue. And let's not forget that this is also something that has been laid out by the Delhi Tribunal in some of the rulings and the reported rulings, which I think has taken a little bit natural course into this clarification, because Saloni did mention that there have been some disputes that have been mushrooming across the country. And I do think some of you also, as I read the comments, are having some disputes where you're not necessarily you're probably just doing an outsourced activity where the primary contract is between two suppliers, and you're in a way providing the service as a subcontractor. Coming to the next slide and the next comment, as we will then go into a very interesting aspect that I will brainstorm with Mr. Pandey and ask some questions. These illustrations are there for you to read. So I'm going to quickly state this. I think the first clarification is a part that actually says, and I do see some questions on that, where there is a marketing activity and there is A in India and there's B, say, in Singapore, and I saw somebody saying UAE or Dubai, and there's an end customer in India, and A actually gets that end customer, and let's say for simplicity terms, gets a commission. This illustration states that it's an intermediary. The clarification actually is silent about the method of remuneration of it being a commission or otherwise, because many arrangements are cost plus. To me, the silence is actually saying a lot, is all that I can say. And therefore, I would, for one, be cautious if I have a fact pattern of actually going and getting customer contracts or procurement contracts, which is in the next slide, as you would see under illustration 3, which is a sourcing service. Either of these two, this clarification says it's an intermediary. And a clarification is clearly binding on the tax authorities, but not on industry. And we'll elaborate that and discuss that in detail next slide. But as things stand, these two scenarios have been clarified to be an intermediary. Coming to the second scenario, I think clearly that part of the second scenario, which you see a serial number 2, C undertakes software development. So let's say C is into software development with an American bank, and C is residing outside India. I'm sorry, A's got a contract with a customer B, both outside India, to develop a software. So let's say it's a software company, and there's B, who's a bank in the US, or it could be anywhere for that matter. And they contract with C in India, saying you need to develop this module or that module or the other. This clarification states that this part is not an intermediary. To me, it's a good part and very well abundantly clarified. And also with respect to software development, as many of you may know, on May 4th, 2018, there was a software circular, and therefore, to me, this is aligned to that clarification. Customer care services, again, we know the vServe ruling was primary ruling that actually started the dispute, if I were to say, on the expansive interpretation of intermediary. This clarification is actually saying B provides customer services to A by interacting with customers of A, and therefore just merely because there's an interaction, that will not be an intermediary service. The education guide also actually stated that call center services requires a call center of India interacting with the customers of their client, and that is not an intermediation. So I'll leave it at that because I'm explaining the clarification. And to me, the fifth clarification, which is within para 3.5 of subcontracting, states that when there's an AMC and there's a subcontract arrangement, that does not qualify to be an intermediary. Let's not forget, merely because a circular says that this is not an intermediary, yes, it is not, but you need to look at other place of supply rules that Saloni talked about, whether it's an immovable property, service in respect of goods available, and whatnot. But staying focused on intermediary, I think these 5 clarifications are pretty comprehensive. I have had discussions with different companies and folks and individuals who have said, why couldn't it be 10 clarifications or 20? But I think what the board seems to have done, and the GST Council and the Law Committee collectively, is that to set the principle, give an illustration, and then let companies run with that. With that, I would, like to get to some questions for Mr. Pandey and some discussion points. I think clearly from our end, Mr. Pandey, what do you feel about this clarification? While I have some specific questions, but you've been so intensely involved on and understanding how this issue was dormant, then it started prevailing, and it went into a very large scale. So your overall thoughts before we go to some questions, sir.
Thank you very much, Mahesh, and thank you, Saloni. Thank you, Sunil, for giving me this opportunity to interact with you all. Mahesh, I think you put it pretty nicely. I would, in my own estimation, I would rank these circulars as among the, the better ones that have been issued by CBIC over the last few years. And I have two different reasons for saying that. Let's first turn to the intermediary. As you were saying, it has taken quite a long time for this circular to come home. But I think in the end, it has done more than what we had expected. So, the earlier circular, specifically referred to certain sectors of the industry, so on and so forth. But what I like about this circular is the clarity in which, with which it has articulated the key fundamental principles of what is intermediation, which is, very, very refreshing. So the good thing about this is that they have dealt with this subject on first principles and elaborated the government understanding of the law in very, very clear language. Now, and as you pointed out, this is something that is binding on officers. So my first thought for industry is that look at your own fact pattern. If you are in a position to show that your fact pattern fully meets the principles set out in the circular, I think you have a very good case to, contest if a contrary view is taken by the tax administration. And of course, the circular is binding on the tax officers. The other thing that about the other circular, I think the good thing is, I think this is one of those cases where the CBIC has acted preemptively to, stop a large body of disputes arising over a period of time. Because, we have been seeing this for the last couple of years, where in some jurisdictions, these issues which were completely settled and which need not actually have been raised were getting raised. And in fact, it's somewhat sad that circular or a clarification needs to be issued, on something as fundamental as this. But anyway, the good thing is that the CBIC stepped in quickly and, clarified the situation, and a lot of trouble that probably lay ahead has been averted. And just one more thing, I think, Mahesh, you mentioned about some feedback from industry about why there are not more illustrations, why different fact patterns have not been specifically elucidated in the clarification on intermediary particularly. What I would say is that if you look at the, the best practices of tax administrations globally, they typically issue two kinds of rulings. And what, the CGST Act or prior to that, the service tax legislation or the excise legislation contemplated and customs does is clarifications. Now, those clarifications are like what are called public rulings by, different jurisdictions. So these are necessarily broad clarifications which apply to, generically to a given set of circumstances. They cannot deal with individual fact patterns. Now, illustrations, yes, illustrations in the circular do talk about specific fact patterns, but when we apply this circular, we need to apply them having regard to the principles that are elucidated. These are different from private rulings, which are in relation to a specific taxpayer and in relation to a specific set of facts. So I think we should not be sorry that there are not more illustrations. because the downside of having too many illustrations is that there would be a tendency on the part of tax officers to say that no, your case doesn't fit in this because it's not one of those cases where illustrated. And then they would try to invent reasons why you fell outside the scope of the circular. So overall, Mahesh, to respond to your question at a broad level, I would say that these are very welcome circulars. And I am quite confident that they will sort out a lot of disputes which are clogging the system right now, and will of course prevent future potential disputes that might come down the line. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I think many of the points that you actually mentioned answer some of the questions from the participants. But let's do a rapid fire on these 4-5 points, which do seem to be interlinked to many of the queries that the participants have or perhaps have. So I think that clearly your immediate take on marketing and sourcing support services. There are 2 illustrations that state that they're an intermediary service. And this is perhaps linked to my third point in interest of time, that on the binding nature of the circular, since you've seen the part from the administrative part, it'll be useful to hear your thoughts on these 2 aspects.
So the thing is that, again, I think we can only give general answers to issues like this, but fact of the matter is that some of these, essentially the question to be asked is this in the nature of intermediation? Is it an ancillary supply to the main supply that is happening? So if these services, partake the nature of intermediation, then obviously the view would be that these are intermediary services. So those 3 or 4 questions that have been put there, are they 3 parties? And as you correctly said, just existence of 3 parties is not enough. Is there a principal supply or the main service, as that was the language used earlier? And is there an ancillary service which facilitates that main service? It is only when these conditions are satisfied that you can say that there is a case of intermediation.
Understand. All right. And I think, before I go to the binding on service tax matter, would you like to just touch upon the binding nature of the circular itself?
Yes. And as I said, that the statute itself provides the powers to the CBIC to issue these circulars in order that, there is a consistent practice of assessment across the country. That is the intent of the statute. There are Supreme Court judgments which clearly lay down that such circulars, because the old jurisprudence is, Orient Mills case and all that in the excise domain, some of the old timers will remember that. The law is that the quasi-judicial authorities are completely independent to, take their decisions, and board cannot bind them. So these powers fundamentally are a reflection of modern trends in tax administration. Now, we cannot be living in an age where each quasi-judicial authority in identical circumstances takes different view, saying that they are independent. So taking into account these factors, the Supreme Court has laid down that as long as the facts are the same, as long as facts are identical, the Supreme Court, the instructions issued by the CBIC would be binding on the tax officers. They, of course, do not bind the taxpayers, because taxpayers' rights cannot be abridged by an executive circular. So, in terms of taking advantage of the circulars, I think what the taxpayer needs to do is to establish before the tax officer that his fact pattern completely satisfies what is clarified in the circular. In that case, what you do essentially is to establish that your facts are such that the circular applies, and once it applies, then it's for the tax officer to pass an assessment in accordance with that circular.
Thank you. No, I think what you did say is backed by the Indian Oil Corporation case by the Supreme Court in 2004, and also thereafter the next principle that the Supreme Court per se and the courts are not bound is under the dairy chemicals industry in 2002 by the Honorable Supreme Court as well. Moving on, and
so Mahesh, just one quick thought that I would like to add to what I said. I mean, taking further the point that you made, because you know it is recognized in the modern tax administrations that when a tax officer takes a decision, it is actually the tax administration's decision. So it doesn't matter to a taxpayer whether it is Mahesh or Parande who's the deciding authority. It is the tax department that is taking the decision, and it is a legitimate expectation that when in circumstances which are alike, decisions will be taken which are alike. So I mean, this is a recognition by the court of that principle as well, and that's where it is. Of course, the tax officer can disagree that the circular applies in the given set of facts, which is a contest that, of course, will go on. And therefore, the clarity of the circular to me matters quite a lot. I mean, the lesser the room for interpretation that the language of the circular leaves, the better it is for ensuring that there is less dispute, so there is more, consistency in assessment. And I think on that score of quality, these circulars do pretty well in my estimation.
No, thank you. And I think you did raise that point, and we have 4 minutes before we cover the next circular. So I'll elaborate what we have, whether you have a refund case that is pending or an appeal that is pending. It's critical and important for you as an SSE to bring out how the principles of the circular or the illustrations apply to your case, because there will always be the subjective element. We're not talking about a classification of, say, a digital watch or a tablet, which is a very binary yes, no. So just be careful that this today is a start to some efforts that you need to make, particularly where you have hit a wrong tide and you would like the tide to change. To that extent, it's critical that you flesh out what the circular means to your fact pattern and appropriately present that to your tax authority. And I do think, in spirit of the circular, the tide should change, because the way I look at it is that it's taken 2 years for this clarification, and therefore even the tax administration has realized that there needs to be some course correction of some thinking. I don't think it's a 1 day or a very short process. You'll have to stay at it. Would be our take, whether in relation to refunds that are pending or appeals as well as investigations. I do want to pick your brains, Mr. Parande, on service tax, because this is under Section 168 of the CGST Act. What would your take be vis-a-vis service tax, Mr. Parande?
Yeah, in my view, in fact, this can be very well cited for the legacy service tax cases also. In fact, the circular at the outset itself acknowledges that the position under service tax and the position under GST is substantially same. There has been no fundamental change in law that should, affect the application of this circular to the service tax cases as well. And as it is a clarification. So there is nothing to prevent that clarification being applied to past cases as well. So even for legacy litigation of service tax, in my view, this is a very useful circular.
Perfect. And I think, you and I had that conversation that this clarification actually has a very specific reference that the intermediary definition is almost the same with the change. So while technically not issued under the Finance Act of 1994, this one, unlike the education guide for the benefit of most of you, is actually issued at least under the CGST law and a section that makes it a very binding circular vis-a-vis GST. But
Mahesh, unlike the education guide, without a disclaimer.
Exactly. That's a good point. I missed that. No, so thank you, Mr. Parande. And, I think I will answer those 2 questions because we are running against time. That what are the options if you have paid? The law does have a period of limitation for refund in indirect tax without getting into this fact pattern right across is subject to important principles like unjust enrichment. Do they apply on export? Have you recovered the tax? I think I'll need another full 2 hours to talk about that topic alone. I can say there is a lot that you could think of where you have a very clear case where you had paid it conservatively. But I would temper your expectations that don't have great expectations there, but do think of it very carefully, but surely and thoroughly. Advanced rulings, well, it's certainly there. The law allows it, and that's something that you could look at. But to do seek professional advice. And in terms of now, would you rather test your position in an audit or a ruling given the nature of this clarification? I would just leave it at that rather than giving a binary saying all out, go for it or don't go. It's there. It's a facility. But let's not forget that some of the rulings were the ones that, didn't necessarily help us and we got this far. I see everything in of these situations as a blessing in disguise that at least the matter got tabled for the policymakers to take some decisions, which they have. I know we are at 5:45. We do have some questions. I can only state that, things like whether the commission is received for admission of students, whether, if it is a tripartite arrangement and if there is a particular fee and you get a commission, I would be worried. And I would think illustration 1 is something that you need to be, looking at. Mr. Bhagwan, I think that what actually gets covered under intermediary after this circular, I don't know. Beyond this, you will have to look at your fact pattern because, and I hope some of the insights that we've shared gives you some answers of what we think has sought to be clarified, and more critically, what is the basic law and how that has to be interpreted. Services by a KPO, will it be treated? Mr. Lakshmi Narayan, Indu, Kuru, I think you please look at illustration 4 and the principles. If it's a knowledge process outsourcing and not necessarily a tripartite where you're acting in capacity of an agent or a broker, at least vis-a-vis the circular, you may seem to be falling into illustration 4, which is not an intermediary, but please do look into that. I think, I don't know if I can answer every question, but I do think that some of the questions are in relation to the next topic, which I would say that, it's last but not the least topic because it's equally important. Before we go there, handing this over to you, Sunil and Saloni, if you could take over the next part on the branch and subsidiary, I'm sure that will give some useful insight to the participants of the event today. Saloni, over to you.
Yeah. Thanks, Mahesh. So yes, intermediary is something that is fraught with considerable ambiguity. I don't think the matter is settled, finally on all issues. I think we'll still have areas where there could be litigation, so it's not entirely clear. Coming to the second circular that was issued pursuant to the GST Council meeting in September, this was on the concept of distinct persons and whether a subsidiary and a parent or an Indian entity which has an overseas affiliate company, whether these qualify as establishments of a distinct person. Now, this issue is a new issue which came up essentially in GST. We did not come across this issue being raised during the service tax era. And this issue came up essentially in conversations with the state GST authorities. I'm not ruling out that it wasn't there in the center, but mostly, conversations with state GST authorities, this issue did come up. And here, I think in the conversations and discussions with the state GST authorities, what was very evident is that the officers were wanting to assess for themselves and be convinced that there is no issue. So though there were multiple rounds of conversation, even the FAQ extracts were provided, as well as the Gujarat High Court ruling was shared with them. Nonetheless, there has been a lack, or they were not entirely convinced of the fact that an entity in India providing services to a related entity overseas did not qualify under the establishments of distinct persons. So they did have a belief that these are established establishments of distinct persons and therefore not eligible for the export of services benefit. So, since this matter had got a lot of attention by the authorities, and this was something which was happening, being faced by taxpayers who had previously been receiving their refunds mostly on a regular basis, and then they found themselves in a situation where their refunds were being rejected on this ground. So representations were made across, and that's resulted in this circular being issued. Broadly, what this circular says is that a subsidiary or a sister concern or a group concern of a foreign company which is incorporated in India, so if that's the supplier of a service, and the service recipient is located outside India, which is a foreign company incorporated outside India, they would not be barred by the condition of the IGST Act, which is essentially that they are mere establishments of distinct persons. So broadly, what this is saying is that in this situation, as well as the situation which is a company incorporated in India and a related establishment outside India, which is incorporated outside of India, in these two scenarios, they would be considered as separate entities and not offices, establishments of a distinct person. This has been the argument that has been put forth, and it was being denied. But nonetheless, with this clarification, there's a hope that litigation on this account will come to a close. These matters are pending at various levels. They could be before the adjudicating authorities, it could be before appellate forums, or it could even be in the High Court. So we have this matter pending at various forums, but hoping that with this clarification, these matters should be coming to a quick conclusion and resolution, and then we can take it. Parandi sir, I have one question for you here. What are your thoughts on this? Considering that in service tax we didn't have this issue, and this came up under GST, and it has required a lot of representation by taxpayers. Do you see this coming to a close, and do you think there could be other issues that could come up which were actually settled? And what is your view on this matter?
Thank you, Saloni. Yeah, I do think that this particular issue, which was which arose only in GST, that I believe would reach closer in the course of time, because already there are pending litigations, and I wouldn't expect any new proceedings to commence after this circular. As to why it started, I don't know. One can only speculate. Perhaps some degree of unfamiliarity with service tax. Particularly for the states, there was a fair amount of learning that had to happen when they transitioned from VAT to GST, and that coupled with the sad aspect of revenue bias in administration, I think that this probably is what one can say is the cause of the eruption, if I may use that. But yeah, going on, which is why I think the circular is the CPC deserves to be complimented for stepping in quickly and preventing further escalation of these disputes. So I don't think anybody can have a doubt about this issue now once the circular is issued.
I'm glad, and I agree with you that that it's good that the CBIC intervened and has issued a clarification to hopefully give clarity to the tax assessing officers, and hoping that this will bring the matter to a close.
Yeah, and of course, some Saloni, some marginal issues will always remain. There was a question, for instance, will this apply to LLPs? Because LLPs are not specifically mentioned. So issues of that kind. Now the point is that going by principles, yes, but issues like that will always remain, but they will be very few. And if the principles were applied, I don't think there should be a great deal of friction that will remain after this circular.
Thank you, Mr. Parande. I'd like to hand this over to Sunil now. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Mr. Mahesh, Mr. Parande, sir, and Saloni for the insights about the recent circulars. Surely these circulars are welcome one for the industry, especially the intermediary one. It would surely help companies operating in BPO, KPO sectors, ITS, in many cases subcontractors, revenue cycle management companies, etc. So with this, thanks to all the participants for joining for the today's webinar. The PPT we would be sending over the mail to all of you who has registered for this webinar. Thank you. Thanks a lot.